Germany today is a global powerhouse, a leader in engineering, innovation, diplomacy, and economic strength. Yet it wasn't always so. The country we know now didn't start as a single nation. It was stitched together from duchies, kingdoms, and principalities. Its path from fragmented states to modern power was long, tumultuous, and at times dramatic. This journey spans wars, rebellions, revolutions, ideological clashes, devastating defeats, and astonishing recoveries. It includes empires that rivaled Europe's greatest, republics forged in the wake of upheaval, tyrannies that brought the world to ruin, and a reinvention that reshaped not only Germany, but all of Europe. To understand Germany today, its economy, culture, and role on the world stage, we must understand its history, a history of ambition and catastrophe, of resilience and reinvention. This is not just a historical overview, it's a story of transformation, one that stretches across centuries and leaves lessons for every nation. Buckle up, we're diving deep into Germany's long road from empire to modern power. When we think of early German history, it begins not with a unified nation, but with the Holy Roman Empire, a vast and loosely bound collection of duchies, free cities, bishoprics, and principalities. Stretching across Central Europe for over a millennium, it wasn't a nation in the modern sense, but a political patchwork held together by tradition, religion, and the authority of an often weak emperor. At times, the empire included vast territories, from the Alps to the North Sea, but the key to understanding this era is fragmentation. Each duchy or city-state had its own ruler, laws, and customs. Saxony, Bavaria, Prussia, all were part of this mosaic. The emperor was more symbolic than absolute, and local nobles wielded real power. This patchwork system made Germany politically weak compared to centralized kingdoms like France or England. It also created rich diversity in culture, dialect, and local identity that would only later be unified under a singular German nation. The Holy Roman Empire set the stage for centuries of shifting alliances, rivalries, and, eventually, the quest for unity. In the early 16th century, a monk named Martin Luther ignited a movement that would reshape Europe and Germany's identity. When Luther posted his 95 Theses in 1517, he challenged the Catholic Church's authority and sparked the Protestant Reformation, a religious revolution that spread like wildfire. Suddenly, faith was not dictated from Rome. It was debated in town squares, taverns, and courts across the Holy Roman Empire. Princes and city leaders chose sides. Some embraced Luther's ideas, others clung to Catholic tradition, and conflicts erupted. The Reformation fractured the empire politically and religiously, leading to decades of tensions that exploded into warfare. Wars of religion, like the sacking of Magdeburg, brought devastation, while treaties like the Peace of Augsburg 1555 attempted temporary peace by allowing rulers to choose their territory's religion. Luther's Reformation didn't just change theology, it altered power structures, literacy through Bible translation, and ideas about individual conscience. The religious fragmentation of Germany set it apart from the rest of Europe, making unity more elusive and creating a cultural legacy that still influences German society today. Faith was no longer private, it became political, and the consequences would echo for centuries. The religious tensions unleashed by the Reformation exploded into one of Europe's deadliest conflicts, the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. What began as a struggle between Catholics and Protestants in the German lands quickly drew in foreign powers like Sweden, France, and Spain. Towns burned, farmers fled, and entire regions were depopulated. Some areas lost up to half their inhabitants. Armies fought not just battles but also looted and pillaged, leaving destruction in their wake. The war wasn't only religious. It became a struggle for power and territory, a nightmare for ordinary people. The devastation was so profound that Germany would take generations to recover. When the war finally ended with the Peace of Westphalia, it also redrew the political map of Europe. This treaty acknowledged the sovereignty of hundreds of German principalities, reinforcing fragmentation rather than unity. It marked a turning point. Power belonged not to a distant emperor, but to local rulers. While the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to large-scale religious wars, it cemented political disunity in the German lands, a division that would only be stitched back together centuries later during unification. The 30 Years' War was not just a conflict. It was a crucible that reshaped the destiny of Germany. In the fractured landscape of German states, one power began to rise above the rest: Prussia. Rooted in northern Germany, Prussia transformed itself from a modest duchy into a military juggernaut. What set Prussia apart was its obsession with discipline, strategy, and efficiency. Leaders like Frederick William, the Great Elector, and later Frederick the Great poured resources into building a professional army and an effective bureaucracy. Prussian soldiers became feared throughout Europe, their discipline unmatched. But their strength wasn't limited to battlefield prowess. Prussia invested in administration, education, and infrastructure, creating a model state with a powerful central authority. In a region where countless small states squabbled for advantage, Prussia stood out as a disciplined and modernizing force. Other German rulers watched and sometimes feared its steady rise. Prussia's military reputation grew through conflicts like the Silesian Wars with Austria and the 7 Years' War, proving that size didn't matter as much as strategy and preparation. By the 19th century, Prussia was not just a state. It was the engine that would eventually drive German unification. Its rise set the stage for a new era in German history. The turmoil of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte shook Europe to its core, and Germany was no exception. Napoleon's armies swept through the continent, dismantling old systems and redrawing borders. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire, that centuries-old political patchwork, collapsed under French pressure, ending an era of fragmented authority. But Napoleon did more than conquer. He inadvertently sparked a German awakening. As French reforms spread across German territories, ideas of nationalism and unity began to take root. People started asking, who are we as Germans? Why are we divided? This was a profound shift. Previously, loyalty was local, to a prince, a duchy, a city. Now, a broader sense of shared identity began to emerge. Poets, philosophers, and students embraced concepts of common language, culture, and destiny. Figures like Johann Gottlieb Fichte preached about a German spirit that transcended old borders. Napoleon's defeat didn't erase French influence, but it ignited German imagination. What his armies broke apart, his legacy helped rebuild, this time in the minds and hearts of those who would one day forge a unified Germany. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, European powers gathered at the Congress of Vienna to restore order and redraw the continent's political map. For Germans, the outcome was mixed. The Holy Roman Empire had been dissolved, so Austria's influence grew in the new German Confederation, a loose association of 39 states that included Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, and others. This federation was not a unified nation, but rather a diplomatic compromise designed to maintain balance and prevent another French-style revolution. Austria and Prussia emerged as the dominant forces, watching each other cautiously. The Congress of Vienna aimed to suppress nationalism and restore old hierarchies, fearing that unified nations could challenge monarchs throughout Europe. Yet, as history often shows, suppression breeds resistance. While the Vienna settlement brought stability, it couldn't stop the deeper impulses stirring among the German people, the desire for unity, representation, and national identity. Across towns, universities, and salons, discussions grew louder. The German Confederation was a stepping stone, not a destination. It kept the peace but did not satisfy the longing for something greater, a single German nation with common purpose, pride, and destiny. The 19th century brought dramatic transformation to German life, not through war, but through industry, innovation, and urbanization. Like Britain, Germany became a powerhouse of factory production, mining, and engineering. Railroads connected far-flung regions, steam engines powered textiles, and ironworks forged tools and weapons that powered growth. Cities like Berlin, Essen, and Dresden grew rapidly as people left villages for industrial jobs. This economic boom didn't just enrich some regions, it created a new class of workers, entrepreneurs and thinkers whose lives were shaped by factories and markets rather than feudal estates. Alongside wealth came challenges: crowded housing, labor disputes, and political movements demanding representation and rights. Marx and Engels, German thinkers, wrote about these very transformations, arguing that industrial society was reshaping human relations. Industrialization knitted disparate regions together. Rail lines connected Hamburg to Munich, and markets linked goods across borders. Economic integration helped build shared interests and fostered communication. People who once identified only with their kingdoms or duchies now began to see themselves as part of a larger cultural and economic whole. Industry didn't just change the economy, it changed the way Germans saw their world. Like much of Europe, Germany was swept up in the revolutions of 1848, a wave of uprisings demanding political reform, constitutional government, and national unity. Students, workers, and middle-class reformers took to the streets in cities like Frankfurt, Berlin, and Vienna, calling for an end to autocratic rule and the creation of representative assemblies. In Frankfurt, delegates attempted to draft a constitution for a unified German nation, the first real effort to turn nationalist dreams into political reality. But old powers resisted. Prussian and Austrian elites rejected limitations on their authority, and reactionary forces eventually crushed the uprisings. The revolution failed, militarily and politically, but it succeeded in making unity a burning question across the German lands. People who once saw themselves as subjects of local rulers now voiced ideas of shared destiny and national citizenship. The 1848 revolutions didn't create Germany, but they created a new political consciousness. This spirit of reform and unity would not be silenced. It would resurface again in the decades that followed, pushing the German states closer to the moment of unification. The unification of Germany didn't come through idealistic speeches or peaceful conferences. It was forged through power, strategy, and wars led by one dominant figure, Otto von Bismarck. As Chancellor of Prussia in the mid-19th century, Bismarck was a master strategist who believed in realpolitik, politics based on practical objectives rather than ideology. Bismarck's plan was clear: unify Germany under Prussian leadership, not Austrian. To do that, he engineered a series of conflicts that would strengthen Prussia's position and weaken rivals. First came the Danish War, 1864, where Prussia and Austria together defeated Denmark and gained control of Schleswig and Holstein. Next came the Austro-Prussian War, 1866, which decisively excluded Austria from German affairs and reorganized northern Germany under Prussian dominance. Finally, the Franco-Prussian War, 1871, united the southern German states with Prussia against a common enemy, France. Victory over Napoleon's France stirred nationalist pride and set the stage for the crowning moment, the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1871. Bismarck's calculated use of diplomacy, backed by military force, created a unified Germany, not by ideal, but by iron and blood. On January 18, 1871, the dream of a unified German nation was finally realized, but not in Berlin, and not through gentle consensus. In the opulent Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, after victory in the Franco-Prussian War, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor. This moment marked the birth of the Second Reich, the German Empire. It was a stunning reversal of history. Germany, once a fractured collection of duchies and principalities, now stood as a single powerful nation-state in the heart of Europe. Bismarck, the architect of unification, had achieved what decades of idealists and revolutionaries could not. But this new empire was conservative and authoritarian at its core. The Kaiser was supreme, the Reichstag, Parliament, had limited power, and Bismarck himself dominated policy through a combination of diplomacy, alliance building, and social reform. Economically and militarily, the new Germany was poised for greatness. Industrial growth surged, science and education flourished, and Germany rapidly became a world leader in chemicals, steel, and engineering. Yet the empire was also fragile, balancing regional identities, rival powers, and rising nationalism. The German Empire's birth was a triumph, but also the prologue to challenges that would define the 20th century. While Bismarck is often remembered for war and unification, his leadership contained an equally important dimension: social reform. Bismarck understood that a stable empire needed more than military strength. It needed social cohesion. To undercut the appeal of socialism and growing labor unrest, he introduced some of the world's first welfare state measures: health insurance, accident insurance, and old age pensions. These reforms were revolutionary for their time and helped secure loyalty from working class Germans who might otherwise support radical movements. Bismarck's approach balanced conservative government and progressive policy, a blend designed to protect the empire from internal disruption. At the same time, he pursued realpolitik, political action guided by national interest rather than ideology. Bismarck forged alliances with Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Italy to isolate France and maintain peace in Europe. Yet his complex alliance system was also brittle, held together more by personal diplomacy than lasting trust. When Wilhelm II ascended the throne in 1888, he forced Bismarck's resignation, unraveling much of the carefully crafted balance. Bismarck's legacy was profound. He unified Germany, modernized its society, and proved that statecraft was as powerful as steel and gunpowder. But his departure left a leadership gap that would matter greatly in the years ahead. After Bismarck's departure, Kaiser Wilhelm II took a dramatically different path. Unlike the cautious strategist before him, Wilhelm was ambitious, impulsive, and determined to secure Germany's place in the sun. He dismissed Bismarck's carefully woven alliance network and pursued a more aggressive foreign policy. Wilhelm expanded the German Navy, challenging British naval dominance and triggering a fierce arms race. He believed that empire and prestige required visible power. Militarism became a central pillar of German identity, and generals wielded enormous influence. Europe's balance of power, delicately maintained for decades, began to unravel. Rivalries hardened, suspicion spread. In the Balkans, a powder keg of ethnic tensions and imperial ambitions waited for a spark, and in June 1914, it erupted with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Germany's leaders saw war as a calculated risk, a chance to assert strength and secure strategic advantage. Allies bound by treaty promises drew nations into the conflict. What began as a regional crisis became World War I, a catastrophe that would shatter Europe's old order and reshape Germany's destiny. Under Wilhelm II, the road to war was paved with pride, ambition, and miscalculation. World War I was a calamity of unprecedented scale. Germany, fighting on multiple fronts against France, Russia, and later the United States, experienced devastating human and economic loss. Trench warfare, artillery barrages, and industrial-scale killing erased a generation of young men. On the home front, shortages of food and supplies created hardship and unrest. Cities that had once hummed with industrial productivity now echoed with the sounds of wounded soldiers returning from battle. The war didn't just drain resources, it eroded belief in the old imperial order. By 1918, with allies closing in and morale collapsing, German leaders saw no choice but to seek an armistice. The war ended in defeat, and Germany was forced to accept harsh peace terms in the Treaty of Versailles, 1919. The treaty demanded massive reparations, territorial losses, and strict military limits. Many Germans felt humiliated and betrayed, not just by outside powers, but by their own government. The shock of defeat and the stigma of Versailles would fuel bitterness, economic instability, and political radicalism. World War I didn't just end a war, it ended an empire and set the stage for even darker chapters in German history. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany grappled with transformation. The monarchy collapsed, and in its place arose the Weimar Republic, Germany's first experiment with democracy. With a new constitution, expanded civil liberties, and proportional representation, the Republic promised political renewal and hope. But the challenges were enormous. Germany faced staggering war reparations demanded by the Treaty of Versailles, crippling inflation as the economy collapsed, and deep political polarization. Middle-class citizens, workers, and veterans were all disillusioned. Some blamed traditional elites, others blamed leftists or socialists. By 1923, hyperinflation had wiped out savings, and bread costs soared out of reach for many families. At the same time, extremist movements on both left and right capitalized on discontent. Street clashes between communists and nationalist groups became common. Still, amid chaos, there were moments of cultural vibrancy and innovation. Berlin became a center of art, music, cinema, and intellectual debate. Writers, artists, and thinkers flourished alongside political unrest. The Weimar Republic was a fragile experiment, vibrant, flawed, and contested. Its successes and failures would deeply influence Germany's future and shape the conditions that allowed radical forces to rise in the next decade. The fragile promise of the Weimar Republic collapsed with the onset of the Great Depression in 1929. Germany, already struggling with reparations and economic instability, was hit hard as international loans dried up and unemployment soared. Factories closed, breadlines grew, and despair spread across towns and cities. People who had once supported moderate parties began to look for radical alternatives that promised quick solutions. Among these, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, capitalized on resentment, nationalism, and fear. The Nazis offered simple explanations for complex problems: blame foreigners, blame communists, and blame Jews. They promised economic revival, restored pride, and national renewal. Their propaganda was sophisticated, emotionally charged, and relentless. As conditions worsened, more Germans lent their support to extremist rhetoric. Traditional political structures faltered, unable to offer effective leadership. By exploiting fear and using democratic processes to gain legitimacy, the Nazis transitioned from fringe movement to dominant force. The Great Depression didn't just collapse economies. It collapsed faith in democratic institutions and opened the door to radical ideologies that would drag Germany and the world into a conflict even more devastating than the last. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany and soon transformed the nation into a totalitarian state. Within months, democratic institutions were dismantled, political opponents were silenced, and civil liberties were abolished. Hitler and the Nazi Party centralized power under an ideology built on racial purity, authoritarian control, and aggressive expansionism. Propaganda shaped daily life. Radio, newspapers, and rallies reinforced the cult of personality around Hitler and the myth of German superiority. Jews, Roma, disabled people, political dissidents, and many others were systematically persecuted. The horrors of this regime would culminate in the Holocaust, a genocide that claimed 6 million Jewish lives and millions of others targeted by Nazi hatred. Nazi policy was not limited to repression at home. It was inherently expansionist abroad. Military buildup violated international treaties. Remilitarization of the Rhineland emboldened the regime, and invasions of neighboring countries sparked global war. Within 6 years, Germany had plunged the world into World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. Nazi Germany was not an aberration, but a terrifying fusion of ambition and ideology. Its rise and fall would leave scars across continents and redefine the shape of the modern world. World War II was a scale of destruction never seen before. Germany's early blitzkrieg tactics conquered much of Europe in a matter of years. Poland, France, the Low Countries, Scandinavia, and many more fell under Nazi control. But this rapid expansion came at enormous cost. Cities were bombed, millions of soldiers died, and civilian populations were caught in the crossfire. The Eastern Front against the Soviet Union became one of the most brutal theaters of war in history. As the tide turned against Germany after defeats like Stalingrad and El Alamein, the country became engulfed in retreat and destruction. Allied bombing campaigns razed cities like Dresden and Hamburg. Infrastructure collapsed. Near the war's end, Berlin was surrounded, and Hitler took his own life in April 1945. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, ending the deadliest war in human history. The continent lay in ruins, millions were dead, and the moral catastrophe of the Holocaust had reshaped human consciousness. Germany had been both a conqueror and a victim, devastated by its own ambition and ideology. In total defeat, it faced not just reconstruction of land, but reconstruction of identity and soul. After Germany's unconditional surrender in 1945, the victorious Allies, the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France, divided the country into occupation zones. Berlin, the capital, was similarly partitioned. Initially, the hope was a unified, peaceful future for Germany. But as the Cold War emerged, ideological rivalries between the West and the Soviet Union hardened. The Western occupation zones coalesced into a new state, the Federal Republic of Germany, FRG, or West Germany, aligned with democratic and capitalist principles supported by the US and Western Europe. The Eastern Zone became the German Democratic Republic, GDR, East Germany, under Soviet influence and communist governance. Germany, once unified through force, was now divided by ideology. Berlin became a symbol of this division. Walls, checkpoints, and barbed wire separated families, friends, and futures. For decades, the two German states developed very different societies, economies, and identities. West Germany experienced rapid economic recovery and became a key NATO partner, while East Germany followed Soviet-style planning and remained constrained by authoritarian rule. This division was not merely political, it was psychological, cultural, and generational. The once unified heart of Europe was now a front line of the Cold War. West Germany's recovery after World War II was nothing short of extraordinary, a period historians call the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. With extensive rebuilding, the help of the U.S. Marshall Plan, and bold economic reforms, West Germany transformed from a war-ravaged land into one of the world's strongest economies. The currency was stabilized, markets were deregulated, and productivity soared. Factories hummed again, producing cars, machinery, chemicals, and steel that would define German industrial prowess for decades. Leaders like Ludwig Erhard championed social market economics, a system that balanced free markets with social welfare. Workers enjoyed rising standards of living, housing was rebuilt, and consumer goods became widely available. This economic revival was not just about numbers. It reshaped German identity. Instead of defeat and despair, West Germans saw progress, innovation, and global integration. West Germany became a respected partner in Europe and the wider world. Its economic strength supported political stability and social cohesion, standing in sharp contrast to the hardship and extremism of earlier decades. The miracle was not luck, it was a blend of smart policy, international cooperation, and the resilience of the German people. In 1961, the government of East Germany, backed by the Soviet Union, erected the Berlin Wall, a concrete barrier that physically and ideologically separated East and West Berlin. What had already been a divided nation now had a stark symbol of the Cold War. Families were torn apart, jobs were lost, and many brave citizens attempted daring escapes across barbed wire guard towers and minefields. The wall wasn't merely bricks and mortar. It represented the clash of two competing visions of society: East Germany's authoritarian socialism and West Germany's democratic capitalism. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall stood as a reminder that Germany was still a land divided. In the West, prosperity and political freedom were increasingly evident, while in the East, economic stagnation and restrictions on basic freedoms fueled frustration. Berlin became the world's most potent symbol of the ideological standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. It wasn't just about two parts of one city. It was about two world orders confronting one another. For Germans on both sides, the wall was a scar, a barrier that defined identities even as it limited lives. In the 1960s and 70s, West Germany began pursuing a policy known as Ostpolitik, opening to the East. Under Chancellor Willy Brandt, West Germany took bold steps toward normalizing relations with East Germany and other Eastern Bloc nations. Rather than confrontation, Ostpolitik aimed for engagement, dialogue, and recognition of borders. This approach was controversial at the time. Critics feared it legitimized communist regimes. But Brandt believed that reducing hostility and humanizing interactions could ease tensions, reunite families culturally, and build trust over time. Agreements like the Basic Treaty of 1972 improved travel, communication, and cooperation between East and West. Ostpolitik didn't end the division, but it softened its impact and laid diplomatic groundwork for a future where peaceful coexistence was possible. In a world still caught in Cold War dichotomies, this strategy was revolutionary. It showed that reconciliation could be more effective than rigid opposition. Brandt's legacy earned him the Nobel Peace Prize and reshaped West Germany's identity from one defined by defeat and recovery to one seeking peace and mutual respect. Ostpolitik was a turning point, proving that even entrenched divisions could be approached with empathy and vision. Throughout the 1980s, dissatisfaction with authoritarian rule and economic stagnation in East Germany grew stronger. Inspired by global shifts, human rights movements, and changing Soviet leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev, citizens began yearning for change. Peaceful protests gained momentum, especially in cities like Leipzig, where weekly demonstrations brought thousands into the streets. Signs called for freedom, reform, and an end to dictatorship. These were not isolated riots. They were sustained, organized, and overwhelmingly peaceful. The courage displayed by East Germans in demanding rights and dignity put immense pressure on the ruling regime. Meanwhile, changes across the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, especially the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, triggered a wave of transformations. What had once seemed immovable gave way to popular will. The image of East and West Berliners tearing down the wall with hammers and jubilation lit up screens around the globe. Reunification was no longer a dream, but an imminent reality. When Germany was officially reunified on October 3, 1990, it wasn't imposed by outside powers. It was the triumph of civil resistance, unity, and the enduring belief that people could choose their destiny. The reunification of Germany in 1990 was a historic milestone, yet it brought massive challenges. Integrating two societies shaped by different ideologies, economies, and experiences was no simple task. West Germany was a thriving capitalist democracy. East Germany had been shaped by centralized planning and state control for decades. Merging these systems required enormous economic investment, social cooperation, and political will. Factories in the East needed modernization, infrastructure had to be rebuilt, and millions of citizens needed new employment opportunities and social services. The government launched ambitious programs to upgrade housing, transportation, and education. But psychological challenges ran deep. Many Easterners felt like second-class citizens in their own country, grappling with identity shifts and economic insecurity. At the same time, Westerners sometimes feared that reunification would strain the entire nation's budget and resources. Despite these hurdles, Germany persevered. Unification became more than a political act. It was a process of healing and reconciliation, requiring patience and collective effort. This period reinforced a vital lesson. Political unity is only the beginning. True unity must take root in shared purpose, mutual respect, and the belief that diversity can strengthen rather than divide. In the decades following reunification, Germany emerged not just as a unified nation, but as a leading force within the European Union, EU. Rather than pursuing isolation or unilateral dominance, Germany chose cooperation, a deliberate choice shaped by the tragedies of the last century. As a founding member of the EU and the Eurozone, Germany played a key role in shaping Europe's political and economic integration. Its industrial capacity and stable economy made it central to EU policy, trade negotiations, and collective decision-making. Germany's leadership wasn't just about power, it was about responsibility, ensuring stability in the Eurozone, advocating for open markets, and encouraging peaceful cooperation among member states. Berlin became a hub of diplomatic dialogue, while German leaders worked with neighbors to tackle shared challenges, from economic crises to climate change. Though not without disagreements, Germany's engagement with the EU signaled a profound transformation, from a nation once at the center of war to one invested in peace, cooperation, and collective progress. Within this union, Germany found a platform not only for influence, but for building mutual prosperity and ensuring that Europe remained a continent of interdependence rather than division. Today, Germany stands as one of the world's leading economies, the largest in Europe, and a global center of innovation and manufacturing. Its industrial excellence spans automotive engineering, chemicals, renewable energy, machine tools, and high-precision technology. Brands like Volkswagen, Siemens, and Bosch are known worldwide for quality and reliability. What makes Germany's economic model distinctive is not just production, but cooperation between business, labor, and government. Strong vocational training systems, apprenticeships, and research partnerships have created a skilled workforce and fostered innovation. The Mittelstand, small and medium-sized enterprises, often family-owned, forms the backbone of the economy, driving exports and technological creativity. Germany's global success isn't accidental. It's built on decades of investment in education, infrastructure, and stable institutions that encourage long-term growth over short-term profit. Even during global downturns, Germany's diversified economy and social safety nets have helped it remain resilient. Economic strength has shaped Germany's global role, allowing it to act as a responsible player in international development, trade policy, and climate initiatives. From the ruins of war to global economic leadership, Germany's transformation remains one of the most remarkable stories in modern history. Germany's journey through empire, war, division, and reunification has left deep imprints on its cultural identity. The country grapples with its past, confronting both pride in achievement and shame in atrocities. German museums, literature, and education repeatedly emphasize remembrance and reflection. Memorials, especially those dedicated to Holocaust victims, stand as solemn reminders of the consequences of hatred, intolerance, and unchecked power. Cultural institutions support dialogue about memory, ethics, and national responsibility. German films, theater, and literature often explore themes of identity, reconciliation, and the weight of history. Youth programs and school curricula integrate historical lessons with civic values. Rather than repressing difficult chapters, Germany has chosen to face them openly, a choice that has reinforced democratic norms and human rights consciousness. This cultural commitment shapes how Germans see themselves, not as victims or victors alone, but as a society that must actively remember, learn, and grow. Through art, education, and public discourse, Germany tells a story that is not just national but universal, one of accountability, transformation, and the belief that confronting history honestly is essential to building a just future. In the 21st century, Germany's foreign policy has been shaped by responsibility, diplomacy, and cooperation. Unlike the aggressive expansionism of previous centuries, modern Germany emphasizes multilateralism, peacekeeping, and alliance building. As a leading member of NATO and the European Union, Germany contributes to conflict resolution, humanitarian aid, and global governance. Berlin plays a critical role in international negotiations, from climate change agreements to economic partnerships. German leadership often emphasizes dialogue over confrontation, economic incentives over coercion, and collective action over unilateral moves. This approach reflects lessons learned from history. Power without responsibility breeds instability. Germany's foreign aid programs support sustainable development, education, and human rights around the world. German diplomats work to bridge divides, address global inequality, and foster stability in regions facing conflict and crisis. Though debates persist about military engagement and defense spending, Germany's voice in world affairs is significant, not through dominance, but through consensus, cooperation, and strategic influence. In a globalized world, Germany's path reflects the belief that security and progress are collective achievements, not zero-sum competitions. Despite its achievements, Germany faces contemporary challenges that will shape the next chapter of its story. Demographic shifts, with an aging population and changing workforce, strain social services and economic models. Global competition and technological disruption demand innovation and adaptability. Migration and integration raise questions about identity, inclusion, and shared values. Meanwhile, climate change requires aggressive transition to renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, and environmental protection, goals that Germany has pursued but must accelerate. Political polarization and debates over foreign policy, defense, and economic priorities continue to spark public discourse. Yet these challenges are not unique to Germany. They reflect global shifts in society, technology, and geopolitics. What positions Germany well is its tradition of deliberative democracy, strong institutions, and social partnership. The country's ability to confront historical responsibility, promote dialogue, and invest in collective welfare contributes to resilience. Germany's modern power is not simply measured by GDP, but by its capacity to navigate complexity with ethical awareness and strategic foresight. The road ahead may be uncertain, but the lessons of the past, unity forged through adversity, recovery through cooperation, and strength rooted in responsibility will guide its path. Germany's long road from empire to modern power is a testament to the complexity of human history. It is a story of triumph and tragedy, of ambition and accountability, of destruction and renewal. From the fragmented patchwork of the Holy Roman Empire to the rise of Prussian power, from the horrors of 2 world wars to the resilience of reunification, Germany has continually reinvented itself. What might have been a story of perpetual crisis became instead a story of transformation. Today's Germany is not defined by conquest, but by cooperation. Not by domination, but by diplomacy. Not by exclusion, but by commitment to human rights, shared prosperity, and collective security. It leads not by force, but by example. In a world grappling with conflict, inequality, and environmental crises, the German experience offers a lesson that nations can face their darkest chapters and choose a better future. Germany's road has been long and winding, but its journey demonstrates the remarkable potential for renewal, responsibility, and enduring strength.